friends. Well, at least it's morning for you, because for you, if you're watching this live, for you, it is Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. But for me, it is Wednesday afternoon, 2:50 in the afternoon, as a matter of fact. But who am I? I'm PB. I'm Pastor Brian, pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church, and this is another episode of PB Reads the Bible, and it is episode 20 on our journey through the book of First Samuel. So we will be doing today is looking at chapter 21. Chapter 21 isn't a very long chapter, definitely not as long as chapter 20 was. And I think I explained yesterday kind of why, or at least my thinking why the author or the editors, whatever the case might be, wanted us to linger, as opposed to Jonathan not wanting David to linger, telling him to get moving. But the author really didn't want the story to come to an end, because it was going to end in grief, in sorrow, and in David and Jonathan being separated, and David going on the run. But so that's where we're going to be today, is the beginning of this period when David is on the run, hiding from Saul, staying away from him. So the next couple chapters flow together substantially, especially 21 and 22. Well, actually even longer than that, from 21 to like 26 or something like that. They're really just all flow together. It's again and again David on the run. But we're only doing chapter 21 today. So it's going to feel like we're ending in an odd spot. Well, it's probably because we are ending in an odd spot, but it's the best we can do. So this chapter consists of two stories. The one is from verse 1 through 9. And then the second story picks up from there. It goes from 10 through 15. Yep, 10 through 15 to give the final portion of it, of those two stories. Of course, we need to remember then on Monday, when we return for chapter 22, to not forget chapter 21. So we don't want to forget what we're talking about today when we start talking next week. Anyway, to not do too many announcements, just real quick. Of course, Sunday is worship, 8:15 and 10:45, both of those times in person. 10:45 is also live streamed. We begin our new worship series, The Exodus in the Wilderness. The sanctuary is almost ready. I plan on finishing it up today, or possibly over the weekend, Saturday, because I know Saturday Sue and I will be here setting up some tables and stuff for the party, because we are having the party Sunday afternoon for Bill and Pat Short, the going away. So join us for worship, join us for the party if you're in the area. And that's it for announcements. I got to get in here. I've only got 30 minutes, but that shouldn't be a problem with today's chapter. All right. So chapter 21 and first story is from 1 to 9. I think I'll read the whole thing and then go back. So David came to Nob, to the priest Ahimelech. Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" Pause. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I want to just talk about these things as we go along. So Ahimelech is the grandson or great grandson of Eli. Eli's descendants after this goes back to like chapter 3 or 4 or whatever, when when the ark was captured and stuff like that, and Eli's descendants family escaped. They kind of fled, and this is one of the places where they went to Nob. And Ahimelech is great grandson, something like that, of Eli, and he's nervous, he's worried. It says he comes trembling to David because he sees David's alone, which is very unusual. David presumably then is known by many people, and he recognizes David and knows that he's the king's greatest warrior, and usually is surrounded by not quite an entourage, but has his fighters with him, his men, and here he is alone. Why aren't his people with him? Why isn't the king with him if it's something other than war? David said to the priest Ahimelech, a little bit of a lie, the king has charged me with a matter and said to me, no one must know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men, in other words, a plan, for such and such a place where he's going to meet up with his soldiers. That's what he's telling them. Now then, what have you at hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever is here. Pause. So David is making a request for assistance. He's trying to find aid where he can and says, give me bread, 5 loaves of bread, or he's willing to compromise, whatever you happen to have. The priest answered David, I have no ordinary bread at hand, only holy bread, provided that the young men have kept themselves from women. Pause. Okay, so I have no ordinary bread, only holy bread. And holy bread would be the bread of the presence. There were to be 12 loaves of bread placed before God in the sanctuary, in the tabernacle. But the bread was only allowed to be there for a day and then needed to be removed and replaced the same day. And the priests could eat the bread when it was removed, but only the priests. Presumably only the priests, or there were allowances, I believe, in certain cases for others to eat it, but they must be pure, because it's not ordinary bread, it's holy bread. So they needed to be pure, clean, purified, and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to see some interesting play on that, which would, of course, we don't get it in English, but in Hebrew, you'd catch the wording, because it's hall is ordinary, and is sacred, is sacred, but it's ordinary and sacred, or ordinary and holy. And David uses those same words in his reply, which is really interesting. The author definitely had this in mind. David answered the priest, indeed, women have been, pause. The one of the rules for purity would be refraining from sexual intercourse. There would have been others as well, but this is the only one that the priest mentions, perhaps because, knowing how army guys are or something like that, and concerned about that one in particular. David answered the priest, indeed, women have been kept away from us as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is a common journey or ordinary. How much more today will their vessels be holy? Pause. So, indeed, women have been kept from us as always when I go on an expedition. That has and he's using that word about holy, being the men are, they're being kept away from us. Go on an expedition. The wording makes it sound like it's holy war aspect, that my men are always, because that's when the soldiers would be required to refrain from sexual intercourse if it's a holy war, because they need to be pure for that kind of a war. If it's just a regular war, regular battles, no, that's not important, but holy war. So David seems to be saying, they're always kept away from that. Women are always kept away from that when we go on an expedition. So it's probably holy war. Now he says the vessels of the young men could be referring, and it's vague and probably meant to be that way. Is he saying vessels as far as the men themselves, or is he referring to their genitalia are being kept holy, or being kept holy? So he's using that word, even when it is a common journey or ordinary journey. That's that word that the priest used to describe, I have no ordinary bread, I have no common bread. Well, even if it's a common or ordinary journey, my men are holy. Their vessels are holy. How much more today will their vessels be holy? Continuing. So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there except the bread of the presence, which is removed from before Yahweh, to be placed by hot bread on the day it is taken away. Pause. So what we're seeing here, or at least some scholars, some commentators see here in this discussion between holy and ordinary and holy and going back and forth, they're seeing, and it's understandable so, sort of the breaking down of the walls and of the barriers between what is ordinary and what is holy in David. That David is quite literally ushering in God's kingdom, or a new form of God's kingdom. And therefore, these walls that separate what is holy from what is common or ordinary are breaking down and intertwining through him. Interesting. Continuing. This is just almost an aside. This is an aside. Now, a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before Yahweh. His name was Doeg, the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. Pause. So it's almost an aside. That's all we're told about this guy, is that brief sentence. He will play an important role in one of our next stories. It might even be the next chapter. But there's a couple things about him. He's like the only other person there, we're told, but he kind of sees or hears whatever is going on. And he's described as an Edomite. Now, the Edomites were the enemies of Israel, often considered to be the enemies. So a person reading or hearing this story, especially for the first time, when it was first come out, it's like, boom, ooh, he's an Edomite. Oh, I bet something bad. I bet he's a villain. Because he's an Edomite, he must be a villain. All right, so the ears would pick up when they heard that. Oh, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. And yes, it will. But and yet he's also identified as chief of Saul's shepherds. Now, why would Saul have an Edomite as his chief shepherd? See, that's interesting. And again, that would perk up the ears of the people. Something's going to happen, and this guy's connected to Saul, and he shouldn't be because he's a villain. So it's going to heighten Saul's villainity or something like that. Continuing, almost another aside. Now we're told David must have left so quickly when he fled from Saul that he doesn't have any weapons. Now David said to Ahimelech, "Is there no spear or sword here with you? I did not bring my sword or my weapons with me because the king's business required haste." The priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is none here except that one." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." Pause. We're going to pause. So David has no weapons, and he gives a brief excuse as to why, an alibi, a story. And then we have this interesting thing. The priest says, "Well, the sword of Goliath, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, we have that sword here." That doesn't fit with earlier chapter 17, I think it was, when David killed Goliath. That's not where we're told his sword went, but in the Septuagint, it says it went to a sanctuary or something like that. It went before the Lord. So, which would presumably be a place like Nob. We'll accept it. We'll accept that, but it's there. The point isn't how did Goliath's sword end up in Nob. The point is everything seems to be aligning for David. He is finding help where he needs help. The walls between the ordinary and the holy are breaking down. And the sword above all swords, there is none like it, it says, right, is available for his use. a sword that is readily recognizable, and a sword that reminds everyone who sees it of David's greatest victory thus far, anyway. All right, so we're seeing all this in David, and we're seeing a new David. We're seeing a new David suddenly as well in these two stories, both in the story and the one we're about to have. David is more active. David is more active. Even in yesterday's reading, David wasn't active. He used Jonathan to do the active stuff. He came up with a plan, but it was all Jonathan. It was all Jonathan. And in the chapter before, it was Jonathan and it was Michael. The only thing he did was avoid a spear when it got thrown at him, and it was God. And it was God. So here we see a more active David, which is interesting. So next section, verses 10 through the end, through 10 through 15, which is the end of the chapter. And it's a weird spot. It's going to sound weird. David rose and fled that day from Saul. He went to King Achish of Gath. The servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s." Pause. Okay, so we've got some things going on here. David escapes the land and he goes to Gath. Now, why would he go to Gath? Because Gath is Philistine territory, right? Why would he go there? He is presumably, because we're not told what he's thinking, presumably hoping that going to a different place, he wouldn't be recognized. He could slip into anonymity, perhaps become a mercenary for the king of Gath. Show off his stuff and be taken care of in that fashion, which does happen, but later we'll get to that. But it doesn't happen here. So presumably he's just seeking that anonymity and just the chance to get away. It doesn't work. He's recognized. He's recognized. In fact, he's recognized not as David, the warrior of Saul. He is recognized as David, the king of the land. So these enemies, these people in Gath, the Philistines, they recognize that David is truly the king, or, is going to be the king, and it's good to be the king. They recognize him as king, not as the servant of the king Saul. Saul is king in name only, even to the enemies of Israel. Wow. And they apparently even know the songs that the women sing about David. Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s. Wow. So David's hopes of being anonymous, being forgotten about or unnoticed, go for naught. He's recognized, and they bring it to the king's attention. So David quickly, very quickly, comes up with a new plan. David took those words to heart and was very much afraid of King Achish of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them. He pretended to be mad when in their presence. He scratched marks on the doors of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" Pause, end of chapter. Like I said, it's a really weird way to end the chapter. I could read the next verse, but even that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's just that David escaped, basically, runs away. But what's interesting here is the point of this story is to show David's cleverness and his quick-wittedness, his quick mind. He had one planned. Obviously, it wasn't going to work, so he very quickly comes up with another one. And the language, the word is words in Hebrew are very tricky and difficult, and it gets translated multiple different ways. So when I said he scratched marks on the doors of the gate, Yours might say something a little bit different, something about banging on the doors and stuff like that, which, almost like banging his head, maybe. We don't know because it's just very unclear, rare Hebrew words that we're not 100% sure what they mean. The point is, he demonstrated himself. He acted as if he was crazy, and the king bought it. The king bought it, apparently, as did the others, because they don't fight with the king. And the king says, "Do I lack madmen? Do I lack madmen?" We could almost hear in that the Israelites then, coming out and saying, the Gath is loaded with crazy people, right? So his plan then, his new plan works apparently, because the king does not want to bring him in, and we'll find out in the next reading, and that David does escape from Gath, does get away, presume. So, my friends, thank you for joining me today. Like, that wasn't a very long one today. I know it was a shorter passage. So we will pick up again on Monday, because tomorrow is my Sabbath, Saturday is my Sue day, Sunday is worship day, and we will be back together then on Monday to pick up from there with chapter 22. That'll be episode 21 for Samuel. So, my friends, I do pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something or relearned something as you go about your days, not just today, but every day. Keep those eyes and ears open to everything that our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those all around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, "Thank you, God," and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Be blessed. Bye.